like that one was Clara.
Oh, yeah.
Give her.
That's a good song.
Good. Nice.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning, Bob.
Certainly an appropriate song to begin the lesson. The question a lot of us ask is, what happens after this life ends? This question has been delved into in many spiritual circles, and yet there are also many different answers to this question as well. This is a question that almost all of us probably in this room have contemplated at one time or another. Those of us on the unity path know that we are spirit, and that spirit is eternal. Once we transition from this life, our life goes on. But a more interesting question is, how does that life look like? And that is sort of the million-dollar question, I guess you would say. No one can say with any certainty about what that life will look like. But this still does not keep us from looking at some of the possibilities. Unity has delved into that subject, and so have other spiritual writers across the globe. The co-founder of Unity, Charles Fillmore, believed in the idea of reincarnation. Actually, if you read some of his work, it's quite apparent that he even knew who he was in a former life, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Reincarnation is often thought of as an Eastern belief associated with either Hinduism or Buddhism. We continue to be reborn into the world as we continue to learn the lessons of life. Probably in a nutshell, that puts into a capsule summary what reincarnation is about. A second take on what happens after we transition from this life is presented by the founder of religious science, Ernest Holmes. Holmes did not believe in death, but rather taught that life just goes on in another form and in another dimension. Actually, Holmes was not a believer in reincarnation. Finally, we're going to take a more contemporary look at what some more modern spiritual writers may think about what happens after this life transitions to the next. We're going to take a look at the writings of Deepak Chopra, who put forward some ideas about what happens after this life ends. According to Chopra, our consciousness determines what the next life will be like. The way we think will create what the afterlife has in store for us. And that's a concept that's probably not too unfamiliar to those of us in the New Thought movement. Our thoughts creating our reality. So let's get right into it. And let's talk a little bit about reincarnation and how some believe that reincarnation may be a path to the next life. Reincarnation has been a major tenet of Eastern philosophy and spiritual tradition for some time. Reincarnation teaches that at some point, every living being starts a new life in a new body, or in some cases, in a new form. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore was an avid student of Eastern spiritual teachings. Actually, when you study a lot of the New Thought authors and teachers, you will find a commonality in an interest in universal spiritual tradition, and that of course would include looking at some of the spiritual traditions from the East as well. Fillmore actually believed he was the reincarnation of the Apostle Paul. And that is quite interesting, as Paul was a significant teacher in the early Christian movement. The teaching of reincarnation was also familiar to those that lived during the time of Jesus. Many of us have read about the Transfiguration account in the Gospels, where Jesus ascended to the mountain and some of his apostles were with him, and Elijah and Moses appeared with him. I'm going to read a scripture that talks a little bit about what happened and what Jesus said as he was coming down the mountain with his disciples. I'm going to read to you Mark 9 in verses 9 through 13. And there it reads, "And as they were coming down the mountain, he charged them to tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man should have risen from the dead. So they kept the matter to themselves, questioning what the rising from the dead meant. And they asked him, 'Why do the scribes say that first Elijah must come?' And he said to them, 'Elijah does come, first to restore all things. And how is it written of the Son of Man, that he should suffer many things, and be treated with contempt? But I tell you that Elijah has come, and they did to him whatever they pleased, as it is written of him.'" So we got to understand the context of this verse. Just reading those 4 verses by themselves, probably you wonder, what are they talking about? Elijah has come. We have to remember that the message of Jesus was preceded by John the Baptist. What Jesus was actually saying was that John the Baptist was Elijah. So, if we think about that thought for a moment, that is a good indication that Jesus was saying Elijah reincarnated in John the Baptist. Jesus, of course, was in the culture of the Middle East. So it probably is no surprise that some of the teachings from the Far East would have made its way over to the Middle East. A key learning point to remember, though, is that reincarnation is not just a Buddhist or a Hindu philosophy. It is a philosophy that was known to the Jewish people. It is a philosophy that was part of early Christianity as well. So, there are also other accounts where Jesus clearly identifies John the Baptist as the reincarnation of the prophet Elijah. Actually, and I'm not going to read the verses, there were times that Jesus asked his apostles, "Who do you think I am?" And when he did, various answers came back from his apostles, indicating that he was some prophet of old, which again supports the idea that reincarnation was an idea that was accepted in Judaism of that time. Reincarnation is a logical teaching in the context of life. There are so many lessons to be learned in life. One could say that our current life is too short for us to get the full benefit of our experiences. What seems to be funny, just when we're seemingly getting the catch of it, we're coming to the end of our current life while here on this planet. So it is logical to believe that we would have another opportunity to apply some of the lessons that we've learned in this life to another life as well. There are other intangible factors that support reincarnation as a spiritual belief as well. How many of us have been to a certain geographic location and we thought we'd been there before? Have you ever had that experience? I remember when I was young, and I was with my sister and my parents were looking for another place to rent out to live. And my sister says, "I've been here before." And there's no way she could have been there before. She's younger than me, and I probably would have known if we actually had gone to that place. This is not unusual. Other people have had these experiences as well. In New Thought, we often talk about attaining higher levels of consciousness. Higher consciousness is achieved by learning the many lessons we have learned on the earthly plane. There are some lessons we can only learn by inhabiting a human body. I would suggest that is the reason why we choose to come back, if we actually do believe in reincarnation, because we have come back to learn some additional lessons. Our ultimate goal is enlightenment. Once we have awakened and become enlightened, it is no longer necessary to continue to be born into a human body. And actually, that is the goal of reincarnation, to say, hey, I'm done coming back. I'm going to be in the other realm exclusively. Some of you are probably familiar with author Caroline Myss in her book, Sacred Contracts. Myss, in her book, suggests that we sort of enter into a contract with God before we come down from the spiritual realm, or come from the spiritual realm and say, these are certain lessons that I want to learn. This would also be a good indicator that reincarnation is actually a possibility of what happens after this life comes to an end for us. For all of us need to evolve as a soul. The second idea we're going to explore this morning is that of Ernest Holmes. Ernest Holmes did not believe in reincarnation, but he did believe that when we leave this life, we go into another dimension. Once again, the gospel accounts seem to provide some support from this viewpoint as well. I'm going to read John chapter 14 and verse 2, and these are Jesus' words. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, but I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you. Jesus was talking about another realm. Some people refer to it as heaven. Some people refer to it just as another spiritual dimension. Holmes believes for life to continue, there must be form. There is some logic to that as well, when you think about it. A lot of people, and some people here, have done work with regression work with regard to remembering things from their past and from different lives as well. Therefore, when we actually learn lessons, we need to be in a form. We need to be in some type of body. Holmes, of course, is suggesting that we will take on another form when we go into the spiritual dimension. Nonetheless, what Holmes is saying is that for us to learn lessons in that spiritual dimension, we're going to have to take on some type of form too. We don't know what that form is going to look like in the spiritual ethers, but it is definitely a form if we are going to learn. According to Holmes, the next life will be one where we'll be reunited with family and friends that have preceded us. In his teachings, Holmes clearly indicates he is not a believer in the concept of reincarnation. And if you want more information on this, there's probably a copy of A Science of Mind here somewhere in the church library or the church bookstore in the back. He talks about that. According to Holmes, life is continually spiraling upwards as we evolve in consciousness. That is why he believes that we do not come back as a reincarnated being, because we reincarnate in how we develop. So this would preclude a return to life in another body on this planet, but it would not preclude us from some type of spiritual body in another realm. The teachings of Holmes provide a direct answer to the question, do we have a body in the hereafter? In his book, The Science of Mind, Holmes clearly states there cannot be consciousness without some form or body. So if one is to believe his teachings, consciousness cannot exist unless we're in some type of form. The question is, what kind of form? Because if we're in another dimension, it's not going to be a physical body. Therefore, in the spiritual dimension, those making their transition will manifest some form in this realm, according to the science of mind. The good news is that spirit already exists within us. So we already have what we need to have a spiritual form in the next dimension. Actually, when we transition into the new realm, according to this teaching, in effect, we will just shut off our own body, and the spirit that is part of us will just emerge at that time into the form in that new dimension. As I mentioned before, the term heaven is often used to describe the next dimension of the Bible. Heaven is actually within each of us. Heaven is actually a form of consciousness. Therefore, consciousness from heaven will follow us into the spiritual dimension. Each of us was born in a consciousness of heaven. We cannot return to heaven unless we recognize it within us. A lot of this is about remembering. It is about remembering who we are. And remembering heaven is not some distant place up in the sky, but something that exists within us as our consciousness. We can experience heaven on this earth. In the new dimension, we have the possibility of taking this consciousness with us as we take on a new spiritual body in this realm. The last area we're going to look at this morning are the teachings of Deepak Chopra, a more contemporary spiritual teacher. Chopra builds actually on the teachings of Ernest Holmes. According to Chopra, it is our consciousness and beliefs that will determine what the afterlife will look for us. Isn't that interesting? That there's the possibility, according to Chopra, that we may create what our afterlife looks like, depending upon what we believe. So if that is true, each of us that might have a slightly different view of what the afterlife may look like may bring that into fruition in the next realm. What disturbs many people is that when a loved one makes a transition, there seems to be an interruption of life. It seems like something is missing. And on the human realm, we experience that when that occurs. But according to Chopra, there's no interruption. Life just continues. And the Bible actually describes this in a very appropriate way. And I'm going to read to you from 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 52. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, for the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable and we shall be changed. So the point I think we can remember from that scriptural verse is that when we transition into another world, or our loved ones transition into the next realm, it happens in the twinkling of an eye. There's probably not a second that goes by before we are in the next realm and find ourselves in the next realm. So our transition, or the transitions of our loved one, occurs, I guess you could say, in a split second. Death is indeed an illusion. A transition is just moving from one life to another life. We are constantly changing and dying to what we have been. What can help us is the knowledge that we do not live from the body, but we live from our soul. Life and death are actually part of the same cycle. Learning to surrender the material world helps us to let go of the boundaries and focus on existence. This is a mystical experience. We actually are the mystic. The different spiritual traditions have a lot of different ideas about what life after our transition will look like. We are what we think. Is it possible that what we think about our afterlife is what we will receive? Chopra suggests strongly that that is, in fact, the case. Unity teachings would probably strongly support that idea as well. Our thoughts create our reality. Maybe there are multiple and alternative existences in the next realm. Maybe if we believe in reincarnation, maybe that's what we will experience. Maybe if we believe that there is another spiritual realm, that's what we will experience. So therefore, We will receive according to our beliefs, and we will also receive according to our consciousness. The possibilities really are infinite when you think about it. It also gives us full control over what our next life will look like. A lot of people will make the comment that that's one thing you can't control, death, or making one's transition. But maybe the answer actually is yes, we can, because we're not really dying anyway. Dying is an illusion. We are just metamorphosing into another realm, and life continues. One thing all these possibilities have in common is that we choose our destiny. Unity has a lot to do about freedom. Freedom to make choices. Even within this congregation and within our general New Thought and Unity teachings, we are not committed to a particular dogma, and different viewpoints are welcomed. Likewise, we have those choices about what the next life will look like as well. The questions about what happens to us in the next life are a mystery that is worth our consideration. One guiding principle that we can be certain of is that we are eternal, and that we transition from life to life. We are life, and the power of Spirit leads us to higher levels of consciousness as we evolve into the divine magnificence of who we are. Namaste. Releasing any concerns or tensions you may be experiencing in your body. Gently closing your eyes, focused on the now. Spirit is my constant help through every change. The ability to move through transitions with ease adds to my quality of life. As seasons change, we acclimate to whether the weather is cold or hot, adjusting clothing and activities accordingly. Each day we transition from night to day, from sleep to wakefulness. Our souls inhabit a particular body for a time. In the end, we release this physical state, yet our soul continues within the eternal life of God. In the transition to and from the physical, our soul is lovingly in God's care. Charles Fillmore described God as unchangeable life, love, substance, and intelligence of being. Transition is ongoing, yet God does not change. I count on this everlasting source of power and I am fulfilled. With my mind on spirit, I experience heaven. Holding images of heaven as a place in the clouds may keep me from claiming the heaven available to me right now, right here. With my mind at peace and my thoughts on spirit, I experience heaven in my consciousness. I do not earn a place in heaven by doing good deeds, although doing what is loving and kind is part of my spiritual path. I find heaven as I grow in self-awareness, think clearly, and maintain a positive attitude. I surrender any sense of separation and experience heaven as oneness. Moment by moment, Spirit reveals more of heaven to me. My human life is a vehicle for loving kindness, and I experience heaven right here on earth. Now we will go into a few moments of silence as we consider our life and the heaven that we dwell in.